So for the final video, I'm going to be covering the Shape Splatter node. The Shape Splatter node is a little bit similar to the Tile Sampler node that we learned in the very first video of the series. So I feel like the tutorial has kind of come full circle in that retrospect. The Shape Splatter node is a really great node to help scatter different objects on a background, kind of like what we did with the Tile Sampler, but instead it actually conforms a little bit more to the background image. So we're gonna get shapes kind of bending with the background image as opposed to just over a flat kind of same height variation on the shape. To show you guys a little bit of that, I just have a basic pyramid plugged into a tile sampler, kind of like how we did in the first video. And I have a Perlin noise set to the background. And as you notice, when I rotate around the actual 3D image, let me just actually do a high-res plane. That'll be a little bit easier. You'll notice that the Perlin noise is giving us some really cool height deformation. So we're getting these nice peaks and valleys. But whatever shape that is being tiled on top of it, it's staying at the exact same height output. So we have these kind of peak whites, and it's always going to be on the same plane, and it's not going to conform to the shape of the Perlin noise. Now, that being said, this is exactly where the Shape Splatter node comes in. It essentially does the exact same thing, but it's doing it a bit more dynamically. So let's just quickly do this. Let's just take our same nodes that we're plugging into the tile sampler. So we're just going to plug this in here. We're going to take our pattern, the pyramid. I'm just going to plug that in here. And then let's actually just move some stuff. We're going to bring this down a little bit. We're just going to plug this in and see what happens. So right off the bat, you'll notice that we're starting to get a little, some different results than what we're getting in the tile sampler. You'll notice that the pyramids aren't as intense, and the values that we're getting are kind of similar to the underlying background image that we have plugged in, which is the Perlin noise. We are getting some weird kind of artifacts. It's not necessarily following the shape quite yet, but that is just going to take a little bit of tweaking on the parameters inside of the Shape Splatter node. So what I like to do is to actually come down into the height portion of the attributes. And what we're going to do is we're going to move up the conform to background. And we're just going to start sliding this up a little bit. And you'll notice instantly we start getting the shape start following the actual contours of our background image. So let's just kind of bring this down a little bit. And there we go. As I mentioned before, it's still a little difficult to see just because the height of these pyramids isn't exactly giving us like that pure white. So what we can do is we can actually bring up the height offset a little bit. And now we're starting to get kind of some more, it's almost like it's bringing up the levels on each different shape, but we're still getting some nice values that are reminiscent of the background image that we have plugged in. So if we bring the scale of our pattern down, so kind of give us the same, so kind of like that. Now, if we go back down to the height offset and we do something, I think, extreme like this, now we're going to start getting kind of the same reminiscent of what we had here. But even with this, even putting it so high up with the extreme whites, you'll notice that even looking at it from a side angle, we're still getting some nice contours, some nice peaks and valleys from our background image. So if we actually bring this, let's just take it back down a little bit so it's not as intense. We're just going to keep it like, we're just going to keep it here for now. That way we can clearly see what's going on, but also you can see that it's following the shape. Even on here, you'll notice that it's almost like it's bending the shape to follow the contours of this purlin noise. Just like the tile sampler, we do have a bunch of different inputs that we could plug in and a bunch of different attributes that we can mess with. You've already seen me mess with some of them as we're setting this up. So again, we can actually go in and change how many of each shape up here. We can do a pattern input number. So not only can we do, like we discussed in the tile sampler, we can actually input multiple different shapes. So if we turn this up to a 2, and then let's just duplicate this. We're going to change the shape into, let's do something a little interesting. Let's do a crescent, see what happens. Well, no, let's not do a crescent. Let's try a cone to see what kind of result that gives us. So you'll see that the cone has a nice little lip on here, or a nice little peak. But yeah, we're able to make as many pattern inputs as we want. The distribution right now is set to random, kind of similar to how the distribution is set into tile sampler. But we also are able to set the different indexes. So we could do a pattern index, we could do a line index, and we could do a column index. We also have the ability to, like we did with the tile sampler, is to plug in a map to tell it how much to multiply each different shape. So we can actually do that right now. So let's actually just bring in a regular shape. Scale it down a bit. We're just going to do a disk. I'm going to put this in the pattern distribution. And now we're going to put the map all the way up. And let's see what's going on. Pattern distribution. If I lower it just the intensity a little bit, you'll start seeing what's happening. And actually, let's change the shape to be something a little different. Let's actually do thorns, maybe? Waves. Yeah, this way we can kind of see a little bit difference in the shapes. So let's scale these up just a bit. Okay, cool. So as you can see from the pattern distribution that we plugged in, anywhere in the circle, we're going to see the second pattern show up. So if we actually start scaling this down, you'll notice that the squares are coming in. And if we had like maybe here, I guess that's the smallest we can make it to have the second input come in, we're able to get this kind of effect. So let's actually just go back and change this back to 0, and then we'll have it set to random. Again, we can change the pattern rotation, so it's not that prominent here, but we can change this to like a 180, and you can kind of see that each different shape is starting to rotate a little bit. We can change it to 90, 180, and 270 if we like. We're able to change the scale. We can do it randomly as well, so you can see that each different shape has a different scale to it. Again, kind of how we described with the tile sampler node, we're able to do a scale map multiplier. That way it'll tell which pieces to kind of be bigger than others. Let's see if we do this and then kind of bring the scale around and back. We can actually, there's an option in here to, if we really bumped this up, and you'll notice how once we bump up the scale, stuff is starting to kind of interpenetrate with one another. We can alleviate a little bit of this clipping by moving up the scale, the scale no overlap. So if you start bumping that up, you'll notice that each piece is going to start kind of separating itself from one another. So that helps a little bit if your pieces start clipping into one another. So actually, let's just bring the scale back down and scale no overlap back to 0. We're able to freely change the size of each shape independently. So by like X or Y, we could do size ratio from background slope. So what this does is it's gonna scale the different objects based on the background image's height information. If you're always wondering what something does, you can always highlight your cursor over it, and it'll give you a short explanation of what each kind of parameter does, in case you are wondering what it's doing. So let's just bring that down. In our position, we can start doing position random. It's kind of the fun one. So we start getting the stuff starting to clip into one another again, but this is more so just the movement of each piece on the actual background. We can change the pattern distribution from Gaussian to uniform. And again, that gives us a little bit of different results. So let's bring back to uniform, or sorry, Gaussian. We can offset horizontally, we can offset vertically, and again, we are able to input a vector map multiplier that'll offset each different piece independently. We have the rotation random, we have rotation again based on the background slope. So a lot of these different inputs have a parameter that is dependent on kind of the height information in the background, so that can change kind of dramatically based on the kind of background image that you plugged in. Again, we have the multiplier and the vector map multiplier. So in here, I would say this is where I spend most of my time inside of the Shape Splatter node. Here we can actually start messing with kind of the height that we've already been dealing with a little bit. We can change the offset, and sometimes, like for example, this height scale is set to 1. We can actually bump this up past a 1 if we want to. We could do like a 10, and you'll notice we start getting some kind of more prominent shapes that we have plugged in. So actually, let's bring this back down. And now we're actually seeing the kind of shapes that we're having. And what this height scale does is it's actually doing a scale on the actual shape itself, rather as the height offset. That's actually how much it's getting off the ground, or off the background image per se. So let's just bring this down. But we're still getting that really nice kind of variation inside from the side angle. So you can kind of see the background image doing its work here. We can change the height scale to random. So right now, all of these are technically on the same level as far as height. So if we were to put this one next to this one, it's going to be in the same plane. So we can actually mess with that, and we'll start getting some different height variations in that. With this kind of parameter, we have the ability to actually enter a map, like a shape or anything that you'd want, and that'll scale it independently based on that map. Kind of what we talked about right in the beginning of the video, the conform to background. You'll notice how much different is if we take this off, and now the shapes are starting to clip a little bit, and they're not rotating to the shape of the background image. So I always like to keep this one set pretty high. Smooth conform background. This is in case some of your meshes are a little bit kind of more detailed. They'll smooth out the mesh. These can skew based on background slope smoothness. We also have cutout black pixels. So right now we can actually turn this on and off, and you can kind of see the result. The cut blackout pixels keep at false will actually want to keep the, almost if you were to like take this shape and you'll notice this kind of black border, it would want to keep that onto your shape. And I mean, sometimes you want that effect, but for now we're just going to keep this off. Moving down into masking, it's very similar to what we had in the tile sampler. So we can start doing a mask random, and it'll start getting rid of a few of the different shapes that we have. We have the mask random map multiplier, and that's based off of an input that we have. And then we have a mask by background slope. So again, this is taking into account the background image that we have. So if we start bringing this down, it's starting to kind of base it off of the different grayscale values in the background slope. So we can just put this back to 0.0, and we'll have that. So that pretty much covers the actual shape splatter, like the actual usage of it when you're actually trying to scatter some objects around. Now you'll notice that we do have a few different inputs in here, and when we click on each different one, you'll notice that we're getting kind of a similar map how we did in the flood fill node. So we'll have like these really cool gradients, and these are really awesome to to kind of coincide with if we type in a splatter color, or sorry, shape splatter blend color, we can actually plug in these two data sets into here. So if you see splatter data 1 and 2, splatter data 1 and 2, we can plug these in here. And then let's just actually plug this into our color. And then say we wanted the background image to be different from the actual objects that are spreading. So let's actually do this really quick. We are going to take a basic shape and we're going to scale it down. Bring this down a little bit. We are going to, let's do a blur, uniform blur grayscale. And we're just going to bump the intensity up a little bit. Cool, this is going to give us a nice kind of gradient on this. Let's bring the samples up a little bit. Blades and intensity. Let's scale this a little bit and then keep this high. Okay, so now we're going to just take a, a directional warp. We'll do this. We're going to plug in the Perlin noise and bring down the scale. Now let's just mess with the intensity, something a little high. Just kind of scale it like that. And just for good measure, let's just add a gradient to this so the tips can kind of fall off at the end. So let's do a blend. Yeah, sounds good. Looks good. Okay, cool. So I'll imagine this as like a small little twig if we want. So let's actually just plug this into pattern input 1. And or sorry, pattern input, yeah, pattern input 1. We're going to duplicate this directional warp and we're going to do just a different warp angle, and let's just move this over here. Let's copy this Perlin noise. Let's do a random seed on it to give us a different effect. Cool. And we're going to plug this one into pattern input 2. So what we have currently is some twigs overlaying on this. So let's actually plug in this gray map here. Right now we're not getting the effect we need, so let's actually go back into our shape splatter node and kind of modify that a little bit. So let's actually bring the scale up of these twigs a little bit. And now we're going to scale no overlap, or actually no, let's keep that up here. And then we're going to do a shape offset. So let's bring this down. Let's bring this height scale random. Bring the height scale right here, high offset. Cool. Let's actually take this down a little bit. What we get, and then change the intensity of this. Kind of give us a more rounder effect here. Cool. So this can kind of come off as like some twigs if we want. Let's actually blur this just a tad at the end so it's not as harsh. So we're going to take this into here. Just going to change these. And then quality set to high, and then just down a little bit. Cool. So say we had this nice rocky ground and now we have these twigs laying on top of them. So you'll notice that the shape splatter data changed depending on the object that we've had plugged in here. So we're gonna plug this in here. And right now, let's actually make our background or our dirt brown. So what we're gonna do is bring in a uniform color. We're gonna bring in something like this, and we actually have a input for the background image on its own. So right there, you'll notice that it instantly just made the background a different color than the twigs. So let's make, yeah, that works. Now, for the actual color of the twigs, we have a few different options. We can duplicate this and we can plug in the color input for this. So if we, let's make our twigs blue really quick just to see what you guys can see. So there we go. We're able to do a pattern 1 on some of these twigs. Now, the pattern 1 is dependent on how many patterns are in here. So like I said, we have 2 different twig patterns. So 1 and 2, we can actually go into the Shape Splatter node and up the pattern number to 2. And now we have another input pattern that we can plug a different color in. So let's just take this uniform color. I'm gonna do something like that. And now we have blue and yellow twigs. This color input node is really cool if we want to do something along the lines of, let's actually take Perlin noise. Let's create it. Let's make it into a crazy gradient map. So if we wanted to plot some points in here. Let's see. Let's do some blues, purples, yellows. Let's see. Reds. And lastly, some. Let's delete this one, actually. Let's delete this one. Okay. Yeah, this will work. So what we can do is plug this into the color map input. And if we go back into this and we actually move our color intensity opacity, you'll notice it's overlaying this kind of map that we have in here. So if we wanted to, we can actually delete both of these and just let the color map intensity do all the work for us. So this gives us a nice kind of randomness to it, which is super cool. And the cool thing about this map in particular is we can do things like go back in the Shape Splatter, and let's bump this up to like maybe 100 by 100. Or let's do like 50 by 50 so you can kind of illustrate what's going on. You can see that the color map is almost, it's doing an overlay on all these different shapes. So no matter how many different twigs we're inputting, it's still kind of keeping coherent to where the colors are on the actual color map. So that's a really cool way to adding some color onto the different shape splatters that you have. Let's see. And then we're able to quickly change hue and saturation levels and just have a few little adjustment layers in here if we wanted to do some more editing on our color map. So there are a few other shape splatter nodes that we can mess with if we actually just start typing shape splatter. We have a few different ones. Some of my favorites are the shape splatter to mask, shape splatter data extract. So with the data extract, we can actually create a few different maps just by plugging in our data from the original shape splatter that we have. So if we plug this in, we get some different maps, and depending on how you want to use them, they can give you some really cool effects. I like using them personally as to create masks for some more albedo overlays on my color, or just opacity to blend different things in. That'll give your albedo a little bit more nice punch to it. And that pretty much covers the shape splatter node and how I like to use it. It's really nice to get some twigs or rocks or any sort of debris to overlay on your texture. You might find some really cool ways of using it if you want to keep those contours in. You could even use this to, maybe if you want to create some wires and you want it to follow the background image a bit, this is definitely plausible with this. So that concludes our tutorial series. I hope you were able to learn something through all the different nodes that I showed you guys. I hope you guys end up using some of these nodes in your workflow, and they give your textures a little bit more detail, and you guys can come up with some really cool effects. Drop me a line if you have any questions, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you.